We're going to hear next from a really remarkable expert on so many of these topics. His name is Alex Newman. He is an internationally recognized journalist and an author, a podcaster, as well as a contributor to Epoch Times and other outlets. The co-author of a book entitled Crimes of the Educators: How Utopians Are Using Government Schools to Destroy Americans' Children. Proper leitmotif for what utopians are doing in so many other areas, including the ones we're discussing today. We've asked Alex Newman to speak about what might life be like for us in an environment following a globalist soft coup. Alex, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours, sir.
Great to be here. Thank you so much, Frank, and thank you to all the panelists. I couldn't agree more with what everybody is saying. This is an enormous crisis, and we have no option but to win. So in terms of what it will look like if these totalitarians, these globalists get their way, I'd like to borrow, first of all, from George Orwell, Eric Blair. He said, if you want a vision of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. Right? That's what they have planned for us, and we cannot allow that. And so to get into specifics and to put it in concrete terms, first of all, I think what needs to be understood is that Communist China is the global role model for what they want the planet to look like. And that's not my opinion. They've been telling us this very openly for decades. And so we can start in 1973. David Rockefeller had gone over to China. This was before regular Americans could go over to Communist China. And he wrote in the New York Times in 1973, it's still in their archives today, he said, the social experiment in China under the leadership of Chairman Mao is one of the most important and successful in human history. Now, I don't know what kind of psychopath could possibly imagine that 50 million innocent individuals slaughtered is a successful social experiment, but those are his words, and anybody can go to the New York Times right now and verify it. The headline for his op-ed was "From a China Traveler." That's barbarism writ large. The general idea has not changed since then. About 12 years ago, George Soros did an interview with the Financial Times, and I've got the video of it. I play it regularly. He says Communist China needs to own the new world order in the same way that the United States owns the current order. And, of course, that is what we are watching happen right now. Just a few months ago, Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, went on Communist Chinese propaganda television and said, and I'll do my best Klaus Schwab impersonation, China is a role model for many countries. And frankly, I don't know what universe has Communist China as a role model for many countries. They are ruthless persecutors of dissidents. They are ruthless persecutors of Christians and Muslims and Falun Gong practitioners and Tibetans and basically anybody who has a different idea for their own lives and their own communities than the Communist Party has. They have used ruthless population control methods, as Reggie has exposed to the world. This is completely unacceptable, and yet it was the norm for generations in China. This is a regime that has completely demolished a culture that was there for thousands of years, a civilization that achieved incredible things. I mean, it's hard to imagine a worse role model for anyone, and yet some of the most powerful people on the planet are telling us that they see this as a role model. So what does that mean in more tangible terms? Well, let's start with the social credit system. In China, everybody gets a score based on a number of factors. Not all of them are evil per se, right? One of the things that they look at is, do you keep your phone charged? Do you pay your mortgage on time? Do you cross the street illegally? And these things may not seem like controversial areas to look at. What becomes controversial is that they're including them in a score that's then going to determine what sort of privileges you're allowed to have. But then you add the other things to mix, like, have you asked questions that the government doesn't like on social media? Do you have friends or relatives who maybe have subversive opinions that they've expressed publicly? Have your children said anything out of line in school? So all these things get factored in, and then you get privileges or lack of privileges based on your social credit score. So if you have a very high score, you can get a good job, you get well paid, your kids can go to a good school, you can hang out with the elites, etc. You can even get a passport, you can go overseas because they know you're a loyal slave. If you don't get a good score, things get progressively worse for you. You can't have a good job. Your kids can't go to a good school. Eventually, it gets to the point where you can't travel. And if you go too far below what's allowed, you'll end up in a re-education camp. And if that still doesn't work, you may find yourself on an operating table having your organs removed from your body for members of the Communist Party or some wealthy oil sheik who's going to pay them money. So that's the kind of mindset that we're dealing with. Now, a lot of people call it communism, fascism. Frankly, the Communist Party of China has quite a bit in common with National Socialism, the Nazi ideology that reigned in Germany. But I think if you want to label it, I think technocracy is a very important word that we shouldn't lose sight of. And a lot of the most powerful people in the United States for generations have actually made an argument that this is the kind of economic system we want to move toward. The idea first popped up at Columbia University about a century ago, and Zbigniew Brzezinski picked up on it in his book, America's Role in the Technotronic Age. It's called Between Two Ages. David Rockefeller loved this book so much, he set up the Trilateral Commission based on that. And so what it is, it's kind of fuses fascism and communism, and it becomes rather than a free market economy, you are allocated certain resources by your overlords in accordance with how useful you are to them and how loyal you are. And so we see this now even being advocated in the Western world through universal basic income, right? Well, you're all going to lose your jobs because technology is advancing so quickly, but don't worry, the government's going to give you a universal basic income. So you'll have a carbon footprint budget, right? After you exceed that, you'll be in big trouble. They'll implement and enforce all of this using central bank digital currencies. And of course, all of this fits right in with the healthcare control that we're talking about right now through the World Health Organization. It is one of the critical levers that they can use to enforce compliance. And what you see in China is, yes, they've got millions of people in concentration camps. Yes, they will arrest you, they will beat you, they will torture you. But in many cases, they don't even have to do this anymore. They've set up the incentive structure such that with the social credit score system, with the technocratic control of the economy, people just behave themselves naturally. They don't even have to break out the terror apparatus and take off the glove from the fist very often anymore. So that's what we're dealing with. You factor in then the advancements in technology that we're seeing, the mRNA injections, the fourth industrial revolution, the advances in genetic engineering, what Klaus Schwab again describes as the fourth industrial revolution. He describes it as the fusion of our biological and digital identities. These technologies are advancing very rapidly. Now, I'm not anti-technology. I don't believe technologies are inherently bad. When they're used by psychopaths, megalomaniacs, and totalitarians, they become incredibly dangerous. And so when you're looking at technologies like, just to pick one out of many that we could talk about, Neuralink that Elon Musk is developing right now, that's going to hook your brain directly up to technology. And in fact, Elon Musk has talked about how they can use this technology even to write on your brain. You put these kinds of technologies in the hands of monsters, it's a recipe for disaster. Now, the UN wants to lead all of this. They're making this very clear. As we speak, they just wrapped up the SDG 2023 summit. That, of course, is paving the way for the summit of the future. In line with that, in preparation for that, the Secretary General of the UN, who, of course, is a well-known socialist, has already dropped a bunch of policy briefs that are intended to guide this process. One of the key takeaways is that during any declared emergency, the UN wants to be the absolute decision maker on everything. And they say this very clearly in the document on the emergency protocols. Any global emergency that doesn't have to be global and doesn't have to be an emergency could result in the invocation of these protocols, where then, according to the text itself, private sector, national governments, everybody would then have to respect the decision-making authority of the UN. We're talking about massive levels of wealth redistribution, the impoverishment of the third world. I mentioned the SDG summit that they just held. SDG stands for the Sustainable Development Goals. The head of the UN General Assembly, when these were passed in 2015, referred to it as the Master Plan for Humanity. And I would imagine God thought that was probably pretty funny. But that's their vision anyways. And they outline very clearly what their plan is for the world. Goal number 10, they make clear that national socialism, domestic wealth redistribution is not enough. We now need global wealth redistribution. They make clear in goal number 4 that your children will be indoctrinated to the point where they won't just submit to these things. In fact, what the UN uses in Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals is they will actively promote the UN's ideology on human rights, sustainable development, gender equality, which in UN speak means radical feminism, abortion, smashing the nuclear family, etc. And finally, I'll leave it at this because I know I'm just about out of time. They're bringing in an entirely new ethical and moral code along with their fake vision of human rights that are essentially the opposite of what Americans have always understood as our God-given rights. And I saw this process up close and personal. I was in Egypt last year for the UN COP27, the climate summit. Right before that happened, they released a document through the UN Development Program saying that the system of ethics and morals that evolved with mankind over a period of thousands of years was no longer adequate to taking care of the planet. And right after that, a whole bunch of religious leaders of the world in partnership with the UN marched up to the top of what they call Mount Sinai. Whether it's the real Mount Sinai or not, it's a subject for another day. They unveiled the new 10 commandments. The new 10 commandments do not include any of the traditional things that we understand as 10 commandments. They include to be compassionate. You have to hear the cries of Mother Earth. You have to repent of your climate sins. They did this big climate repentance ceremony. So, folks, they have incredible plans for us that deal with every area of our lives. The future of our families, our liberties, our churches, our communities, and our country are all on the line. And I want to just echo everything that everybody else has said. We cannot lose. We must resist this. Everything's on the line, and we have to defeat these people. Thank you.
Alex Newman, thank you. Very powerful exposition on so many of the topics that have been discussed already and amplifying the most important of them.